Thank you. It's great to be with so many good people that are doing so many good things. Jerry, Timothy, Tim, Dr. Miller, Jeff and Lynn, all of you, thanks for all you're doing. Guys don't like talking about prostrate awareness, but we do like talking about football, and it's football season. How many of you have ever been in a huddle? You know, at the park, playing, in high school, in a huddle. A huddle is a very special place. And the higher you get, the closer the huddle becomes. I had two sons. I have two sons. One played at USC, was a three-time All-American there for Pete Carroll. At the time, they were winning 35 straight games, which was the record. My other son played at Duke, which was losing 22 games and was the record. So when we sat down at dinner, I had both records. But the great thing was that both my boys were learning the same lessons. You know, for my son at USC, he was fortunate enough in 2008, the Falcons drafted Matt Ryan at number 3 overall, and they traded up to get a second first-round pick, and they picked my son, Sam Baker, at 21 to protect his blind side as a left tackle. And when we traveled at USC, when we'd go to Notre Dame, which is a big rival, we got any Notre Dame fans here? Good. Never lost to Notre Dame in his 5 years there. He was cramming 4 years of education into 5 years, but never lost to Notre Dame. But when we'd go there, he was the tackle in the Reggie Bush push game. We'd take 15,000 people from USC with us, so we weren't as loud as the Irish, but we were almost as loud. But let me tell you, when he was with the Falcons and we would go to Lambeau Field, there were maybe 100 Falcon fans. All those Green Bay Packer fans, they're on a waiting list for 20 years and they don't give up their tickets. You know, so there wasn't anybody else, and they're loud. And as Jeff knows, when you're a left tackle, you need that snap count because you're going to kind of intercept this grenade that is a defensive end that runs about a 4'6", 4'5". He's 285 pounds. You know, eats children for breakfast, and this is the guy you've got to block while you're going backwards and he's coming at you. And the only thing you've got is knowing that snap count. So they'll try to be as loud as they can and make as much noise as they can so that you lose the snap count and you can't hear it, and you lose the advantage you have over your adversary. So when you're in the huddle, it's a critical place. You got to tune out all that noise that's around you. You've got to tune in. One of my Hall of Famers, the great Yoran Yeri, said that he spent 17 years in an NFL huddle and he only talked twice. He said the huddle was a place to come together. He said that after his rookie season, as he became a veteran, he learned that he could look at people and listen with his eyes, not with his ears. He could see who needed help. He could see who was in trouble. He could see who's frustrated. He could see who he could rely on. Because when you broke that huddle, you have to break it as one heartbeat, because there's an adversary on the other side of that line that is going to overtake you if you're not ready. And sometimes they'd get tackled for a loss, or sometimes there'd be an interception, or sometimes there'd be a penalty, like there were 14 times for the Falcons last night. But you have to huddle up again. And that's exactly what you're doing right now. You're huddling up as a community. You huddle up with your family. You huddle up with your company. And respectfully, I want to tell you that we need to huddle up as a country. Seldom in my lifetime have I seen us be more divided or seemingly more angry with each other. And we're all Americans. You know, while it is football, and understand that with all the challenges to football and the NFL, the TV ratings for the NFL are 13 times higher than Major League Baseball, the NBA, and the NHL combined. That's a mighty powerful platform. But more importantly, it's a metaphor for life. We've heard about the game of life right now. And you may not have a bronze bust in Canton, Ohio, which isn't easy to get, but you can have a Hall of Fame life. You know, I've got the greatest job in the world. The mission at the Pro Football Hall of Fame is to honor the great heroes of the game, not just our Hall of Famers, but anybody that ever played this game, especially with 3 Super Bowl rings like Jeff Bostic. To preserve its history, to promote its values. I call it the Church of Football. There are great values that this game teaches. It teaches character development. And respectfully, I know that there's probably some teachers in the room, and thank you for your contribution to our children and the great educators we have. But I get to travel all across the country and talk. And I think I've yet to find one person that went to their calculus teacher or their chemistry teacher for life advice when their marriage is on the line, or they're surviving a divorce, or they're facing a healthcare crisis. But I'll tell you, we all go to our coach. Because our coach taught us how to get up when we got knocked down, or how to go on when we didn't think we could go on any farther. And the last thing we do at the Pro Football Hall of Fame is we celebrate excellence. My job, along with the other teammates I have at the Pro Football Hall of Fame, is to calibrate excellence. To be a Hall of Famer is extremely hard. There have been well over 300 million young men and now women that have played this game of football. A lot of you are out there now. There's only been 5 million that have ever played it in college. There's only 27,000 that have ever been paid to play it, coach it, or officiate it in the National Football League like Jeff has, or my son has. And out of those, there's only 318 today who have a bronze bust in Canton, Ohio, and there's only 182 living Hall of Famers. That's extremely elite. And as part of my job, I get to knock on the door, if you've seen that video, and welcome them into the Pro Football Hall of Fame for those that are selected. There's 48 elite media selectors, guys like Peter King from Sports Illustrated, or Sal Palantonio from ESPN, and they are opinionated. And you kind of got to be 6'9", 400 pounds to run this meeting. I don't have a vote, but we got to get done by 7 o'clock because we're going to show it to the nation. And we get started at 6 a.m. And then I open the envelope from Deloitte & Touche, and we get on, we bring them all to the Super Bowl, and I knock on the door of the guys who won. One year, we didn't get it done in time, so we had to call them real quickly because we got to get them over to the honor show live on TV. And I remember that year I called Michael Strahan first, and because we had to get him across town in New York. And then we called Derek Brooks because Derek is a friend of mine, and I just wanted to call him next. The third guy I called was a punter by the name of Ray Guy. He'd been eligible for 29 years. And he almost didn't answer my phone because I'm area code 714 from Newport Beach, and he was looking for 330 from Canton. But fortunately, he did, and I said, Ray, this is Dave Baker. I'm the new president of the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And in a slow southern Mississippi drawl, he said, yes, sir. I said, well, Ray, it is my great pleasure. And I got that far, and he hit the ground. I could hear his phone rattling around. His wife is going, baby, honey, are you okay? Sweetheart, are you all right? And it was 2 minutes, I kid you not, before he got to the phone again, which is an eternity when you're trying to get guys. I thought I'd killed my first Hall of Famer. And he picked up the phone, and his first words were, I'm sorry. I didn't know until now how much this meant to me. It's the preeminent moment of their professional career. This last year, I knocked on the door of Brian Urlacher, who had a do not disturb sign on his door. But he was glad that I did. Jerry Kramer, who'd waited 45 years to be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. I'll never forget Brett Favre, because on that day that we selected Brett, you know, it was 12 hours of work, but it only took 10 seconds to select Brett Favre. You know, I called on the reporter from the Green Bay Gazette, and he said, well, I've got a presentation. Do you really want it? And I kind of looked around the room. I said, no, let's go on. And he was elected like that. He knew I was going to knock on his door. But when I knocked on his door, he put his hands in his pocket, just like this, and he kind of hung his head like a 10-year-old kid. And I said, you're one of the 302 greatest players, coaches, or contributors of all time. and he knew what that meant. We took him over to the honor show, and when they introduced him live to the nation, some of our Hall of Famers in the audience come up spontaneously on the stage and welcome them into this incredible fraternity. And then we have a press conference, and I was sharing with some friends last night. I run the press conference, and they were sitting to my right, and Brett happened to be the guy right next to me, and there's 80 TV cameras. And I said, "How you doing?" He says, "Are you kidding?" He says, "I just shook the hand of Roger Staubach." And I would have thought that they'd met, and I said, "You don't know him?" He says, "No, you don't understand." He said, "All my life I dreamed of being Roger Staubach." And he says, "You know, I guess now I'm on his team forever." Even Brett Favre has heroes. Even Brett Favre has people we look up to. Our values at the Hall of Fame are really 5 things, and there's about 90 associated with the game of football, but we focus on commitment, integrity, courage, respect, and excellence. You know, if you're ever part of a team, it's a real miracle because you have to surrender yourself to something that's bigger than you are. And you learn that if you give yourself to something, you actually become more relevant, not less. And it's not so much what you get in life, it's what you give in life. You know, I grew up with 6 channels like a lot of you did. You know, 3 national channels and 3 local channels, and now I've got 1,500 channels. And quite honestly, I cannot figure out why I should keep up with the Kardashians. And I've worked on this. I'm trying to understand. But there's more important things to life than what you have to wear, or the housewives of Orange County or New Jersey or Atlanta or wherever. It's about what you give, and when you give your life to something, you become more relevant. And when you commit to something, like Jeff Bostic did, he had to buy into Coach Gibbs' philosophy, and you had to be all in. And when you do that, you learn about responsibility and sacrifice. And when you do that, you learn about honor. I think it's very sad that in our schools today that we don't teach honor. So where do you learn honor? You learn it by giving it yourself to something that's more important than you are. The saying that I'm going to be a part of saving a life today through prostrate awareness. Not long ago, actually it was about 2 years ago, I guess, just before the election, President Trump came by. And President Trump, our governor in Ohio, was sitting out the race, and Ohio is a key state. If you're a Republican, you don't win unless you win Ohio. So the Pro Football Hall of Fame's kind of big in Ohio. He said, "Hey, would you close down the museum and let Mr. Trump come by, and would you be willing to get your picture taken with him?" And we said, "Well, we're not going to close it down, but if he comes out at 5 o'clock, we'll keep it open late. And I'll be glad to get my picture taken with him, but understand that if Hillary comes by later, we're going to get our picture taken with Hillary too." And they said, "Great." So it was an opportunity to share with him how we thought America should be great again. And we stood at one point where we have 6 million pictures and 40 million documents, and I told him, in that archival area, there's information about Teddy Roosevelt in 1905. The game of football was really under attack in 1905. There had been 19 deaths in college football alone that year, 179 serious injuries. The game was this huge battering ram. And college presidents were going to terminate football, no matter how popular it was. And so, no less than the President of the United States, Teddy Roosevelt, had meetings in the conference rooms of the White House, and he was in a situation where he wanted to save football because he felt it was important for young men to be rigorous and tough and disciplined. And so he, having been Secretary of the Navy, prevailed upon Paul Daschle, the head coach at Navy, to prevail upon Walter Camp, the keeper of the rules at Yale, to incorporate this thing called the forward pass. And now the game is all about the forward pass. But it was really intended to save football. But what was incredible about that is that 30 years later, we had young men in the Pacific, in Europe, in Africa, who were fighting for the freedom of the world, who knew what it was to be in a huddle, to knew what it was to give themselves to something that's greater than them. They knew what it was to be part of a team. And those guys, Tom Brokaw called our greatest generation. You know, the second element is that integrity. You know, when you're a player like Jeff was, you really have to be honest with yourself when nobody's looking about your own training. And then you have to be accountable to others. And then finally, you have to have trust. When you're an offensive lineman, you have to trust. My son is a left tackle. I had to trust that left guard. And he had to trust that fullback that he was going to pick up the blitzer, or the tight end, Tony Gonzalez, that was next to him. And if each one of them shaves a millisecond off of their performance by trusting each other, all of a sudden they're a championship team and they score a touchdown. That's also true of our families, where trust is critical to every marriage, to every family, where trust is critical to every company, to every community, and to our country. The third thing is courage. It is hard doing what these guys do. And because of that, they learn to persevere and rely on each other. But courage is what gives us hope. Hope is a powerful tool. You know, it's fascinating through football. I can look to Vince Lombardi going in the 1950s to Green Bay, Wisconsin. It was just this little snowy town. He wins 3 national championships, and all of a sudden, Green Bay is Titletown, USA. In the 60s, the Pittsburgh lost steel. The Steelers had no steel in their town. And they draft a guy named Mean Joe Green who doesn't know any better, so he starts working hard on the practice field. That goes to the playing field goes to the stadium to the community, and they win 3 Super Bowls, and Pittsburgh reinvents itself as the city of technology and art. In the 70s, it was, you know, Eddie DeBartolo buying the 49ers. The city was so divided that they had assassinated one mayor and a commissioner. But he hires Bill Walsh and Joe Montana and then Steve Young, and they win 5 Super Bowls, and all of a sudden, San Francisco is this community of unity. Dallas had a real estate recession. They win 3 Super Bowls, they're going through the roof. The best example is Katrina. Half the town leaves because of a hurricane. Steve Gleason goes in and blocks a punt on Monday Night Football that carries them all the way to the Super Bowl, and all of a sudden the music is back in New Orleans. Courage, perseverance, and hope. The fourth thing is respect. You know, this game teaches you to respect yourself. It teaches you to respect your opponent and care about the person next to you more than you do you. And ultimately, it teaches you how to respect the person apart from you. You know, that leads to love. The guys who are Hall of Famers who come to the enshrinement every year, what they miss most is the love that they found in the locker room. It's caring about one another. And that's what prostrate awareness always is. These guys, sometimes they don't take care of themselves. Now, a guy like Jeff Bostic played hurt over and over and over again. So we like to think we're big, strong guys and we don't need help and we're not going to cry out. Well, I want to tell you, that's not the modern athlete. James Harrison, who just retired from the Pittsburgh Steelers, was reported to have spent $500,000 on his body every year. $500,000, because if he could extend his playing career another year or 2, making $8 or $9 million a year, that was a good investment. But what's true of James Harrison is also true of an aging executive, because I've got grandkids to raise and I've got business to do. I've got a difference to make, and so do you. So we can make a difference together. So I'm going to ask you here today, if you could, how many of you, when you got up today and you looked in the mirror, you know, kind of like me, said, you know, you're not bad looking for 400 pounds? How many of you said that? Okay, how many of you said, well, you know, I'm going to make a difference today? How many of you said, I'm going to save a life here today? Part of that commitment, that integrity, that courage, that respect, that yields excellence, how many guys here would commit to understanding within the next week what their PSA score is? Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. How many other guys here? It only takes a second. How many of you will text a friend within the next day and say, hey, I love you so much. I went to the Prostrate Awareness Luncheon. Let's go get tested. What I have learned a lot is guys care a lot about their teammates. They may not care about themselves, but they care about those other guys. They care about helping other guys survive. I will tell you, this is a great game. And it is not just for the guys like my son or Jeff who got paid for it, and it's not just like the guys, the 318 that are in the Hall of Fame. It is a game for all of us that teaches great things. It teaches us how to huddle up. It teaches us how to be together. I remember the game's greatest day. I happened to be in New York on 9/11. I had an apartment on the 34th floor, and at 8:42, I could turn from my TV, and I could look out my window that was faced downtown, and I couldn't quite see Tower 2 fall, but I could see all the debris rise up. And I remember how that incredible city was paralyzed and how our nation was stunned. Commissioner Tagliabue is a good friend, and Commissioner Goodell now is a very good friend. And I remember the trials that they went through of trying to decide whether they play the next Sunday, and I believe correctly so, they decided not to play because there were things more important than football right then. But I believe the following Sunday was the greatest day in the history of this game, where 70,000 people at Arrowhead Stadium were waving American flags as the New York Giants came onto the field, their opponent. And for everybody in that stadium and for stadiums across America and for millions more of us watching on TV, we held hands. We got our bearings. We started to get up from getting knocked down. And 11 years later, we held a Super Bowl in New York City and never mentioned a word about 9/11 as a testimony to the world is that you can knock us down, but you can't knock us out. A couple years later, I happened to be at Walter Reed Hospital with two of my owners in the Arena Football League, John Bon Jovi and John Elway. And we were going to go to Walter Reed, where there were a number of amputees there. And at the last moment, those guys canceled. And it was a little concern to me because I'm not a rock star and I'm not a Hall of Famer. I'm just a 400-pound guy in a suit. But my name was on the ball as commissioner of the league. So we quickly got 25 balls, and I went in and I was humbled to give a ball to a guy who had no arms to accept them. But for every guy, just getting a football was a big deal. We'd have to wash up as we came after each room and sterilize. And then I went into one room with a young man from Iowa that I will never forget. He was missing his right arm, right at the shoulder, and his right leg right at the thigh. And he, quite honestly, looked kind of different, kind of like a human pogo stick. But man, when I gave him that football, he talked about his high school team, he talked about the lessons he learned, he talked about his coach, he talked about being at the park when it rained, they would all meet for the mud bowl. And so I kind of finished with him and I turned to his mother who was right next to me. And she was in a wheelchair, and being the father of two boys myself, my heart went out to her. And I knelt beside her and I said, ma'am, thank you so much for the sacrifice that your son has made for me and my family. And then I kind of added, I'm sorry. And I want you to know, she put me in my place just like that. She said, oh, you mean this? She said, don't you worry about this. He's been knocked down before. He knows how to get up. And she said with a big smile, I promise you that he will. The game is not just for the guys who get paid for it. It's for the guys who will become our soldiers, our police officers, our firemen, our fathers, for the lessons of life that it teaches. Let me conclude with one last story, and frankly, it's the best lesson I ever learned. And I'm embarrassed to say that it wasn't in college, it wasn't in law school, it wasn't in a church. It was watching a college football game in 1975. was doing this thing. I was reading this thing that they used to have called the newspaper. And I was reading the box scores in the newspaper. I used to love doing that. And I had piled these things. I don't know if you have them in Georgia, but it's Hostess snowballs, kind of on a plate. And I had Diet Coke to cancel out the snowballs. And I'm watching the game of the week on TV, which was Penn State and somebody. And a guy who I think history will be kinder to than the NC2A, Joe Paterno, was on TV. And a guy who became one of my friends later on, an announcer for the Arena Football League, Mike Adamle, was an announcer for ABC. And they did this thing that's kind of weird where they interview one coach as he goes off at halftime and the other coach as he comes on at halftime. So the second half's about to begin. This is, late in November. And Adamle goes, and there's guys running in front of the camera, and it's pandemonium. And Joe Paterno was this guy, kind of looked like Columbo. He had horn-rimmed glasses and a string tie and a raincoat. And Adamle says, Coach, looks like you're going to go 11-2 if you win this game today. He says, that means you'd go to the Orange Bowl and you'd play for the national championship. Do you think you're one of the two best teams in the country right now? You think you belong in that game? And Coach Paterno is kind of in the middle of his job, kind of hems and haws. He goes, well, I don't know. That's for others to decide. There's a lot of politics involved. And you could obviously see that the producer was talking into Adamle's ear and was telling him to stretch it, probably like he has you, Jerry. He says, well, Coach, let me ask you, is this the best team you've ever had? And Paterno kind of turned around and he looked at some of the guys behind him and he says, yeah, they're a good team. They're a real good team. Real good team. I don't know that they're best. So it's another short answer, and you can tell Adamle's got to stretch it. He said, well, Coach, he goes, what would be the best team you've ever had? And Coach Paterno says, well, if I had to decide, I'd say 1963, Brown University. I got to tell you, with that, I put my paper down because I'd never heard of this team before. And Adamle kind of looked at him and said, well, Coach, who are they? And he said, well, Mike, those guys only won 3 games. Okay, now I am totally sitted up. I'm totally glued into the TV. And Adamle asked my question. He says, well, Coach, if they only won 3 games, how could they possibly be as good as these guys who are 11-2 and are going to play in the national championship? And I'll tell you, right there in the middle of his job, in front of 107,000 people and millions more watching on TV, this guy put the game all in perspective. He said, oh, Mike, I don't know if you know, but off of that team in 1963, I lost a young man in Vietnam. He said, I've got a congressman, and I've got 3 state representatives, and I've got 4 bankers. And he says, I've got 3 lawyers, and I've got 6 doctors. And he went through as if he knew where every one of them was. And he finished by saying, I've even got 7 kids out there that are teaching other kids football and life. Not football, football and life, just like me. He said, this is a great team today, but those guys from 1963 are changing the world. That's what it's all about. That's why we're here today. That's why we can love someone up and we can huddle up, not just to enjoy the game, not just to do more for ourselves, but to change the world. God bless you. Thank you so much for being here.